Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight. How shall I look again upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. At the roots of the mountains, I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit. O Lord my God, as my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you in your holy temple. Those who worship vain idols forsake their true loyalty, but I, with a voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will pay. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. Then the Lord spoke to the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon the dry land. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God.
First things first. May God forgive Joe Stobaugh for the extravagance of that introduction. And may God forgive me for enjoying it. Joe and I were having a conversation once, and we got to talking about this classic bass player named Leo Sklar. He played for James Taylor and some other famous folks, and he had a saying, ain't no money above the third fret, which in guitar terms means if a bass player's up above there, it means that the player is hot dogging, just really not supporting the song, but doing what the guitarist wants to do. And I want to tell you, Joe knows that there ain't no money above the third fret. He knows it better than just about anybody I know. And you are the blessed recipients of having him and Wendy, this amazing band. So I hope you know what you've got here and what you've got in Grace Avenue. This is a very unusually full and wonderful church. So, there you go. Once upon a time, a rabbi said something to me that changed the way I think about the Bible and about the religious life. I was wrestling with a passage about wrestling, chapter 32 of Genesis, in which the trickster Jacob is running away from the brother he has duped. While attempting to escape from his angry brother Esau, Jacob comes to the river Jabbok and there encounters a being he can't quite name or understand, and the two of them have an epic all-night wrestling match. Now, at the apex of this wrestling match with his heavenly wrestling partner, because see, we know it's an angel of God that he's wrestling with, Jacob shakes the wrestling partner and says, I will not let you go until you tell me your name. But God, being God, knows that the issue is that Jacob is really trying to figure out who he himself is. It's Jacob who needs the new name. He needs to know who he is. Now, not unlike my preparation for today's sermon, I turned that passage, that Genesis 32 passage, upside down. I couldn't figure out what it finally meant. So I invited the senior rabbi from a nearby temple to lunch, saying that I needed his help in understanding that text. He said he'd be delighted. Now, for an hour and a half, he turned that story inside out, raising every possible motive of all of the characters. My head was spinning with delight. That is until I came to the awareness that I still didn't know where to land for the writing of the sermon. He just made it bigger. Well, I was just about to ask him which of the interpretations he had named was the right one. Anybody here would have done that? Okay, thanks. And at that moment, he got up from his chair. He looked into my eyes with a kind expression, and he said, "John, thank you for doing the religious life with me today." And after an initial internal what, I realized that he had said something wonderful. There we had been, sharing food, talking about our families, and then talking for an hour and a half about the elusive, mysterious, wonderful God we both love. We were being drawn into a story so big and so spacious that we could enter it from a dozen places and find something wonderful in each one of those places. We could see ourselves in each one of those places. I felt such energy, remarkably peaceful, given that he hadn't provided me with an answer for my sermon. Friends, I say to you, thank you in advance for doing the religious life with me today. And guess what? We have a story as big and as spacious as the one in Genesis 32, so we can enter it from lots of different places. The book of Jonah defies our attempts to figure it out. It refuses to yield the answer we're looking for. No matter how much we shake the Bible, the real meaning doesn't fall out. This story is far too important and far too wonderful to have figuring it out as our goal. We just need to walk into it and see what happens. I love the way Joe invited you into the story last week, so I only hope that I don't derail where he's going. So, buckle up, friends. Chapter 2, here we go. When we last left our hero, he had been thrown into the ocean by sailors because that's what he told them to do. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," said Jonah. "Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great storm has come upon you." You may be already getting an idea of what I think of Jonah, okay? Okay, time out. Are we supposed to take this guy seriously? God told him to go to Nineveh, like Iraq, and he got on the fastest ship to Tarshish, like Spain. He went down in the belly of the ship and fell asleep. Is he a classic bad boy or something? He had said to the sailors, "I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And as a result of my devotion to the God of heaven, I am running away as fast as I can. And I actually wish I was dead so I could prove to the God of heaven that I shouldn't have to go to Nineveh." What a guy. So is he defiant? Is he clueless? Is he nuts? So there he is flailing in the water, and along comes a really big fish that has been provided by God. That's what the text says. But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah. It's such an odd verb because the circumstances are a good bit different than providing you a complimentary beverage on your flight to Houston, or providing you a napkin to wipe the mustard off your cheek at Whataburger. Usually when you use the word provide, you're offering a service. So is God providing a service for Jonah? Being in the gassy, gushy, krill-filled innards of a large fish is an unusual place to provide anything other than a night of pure terror. But friends, this is a story. We mustn't try to make literal sense of everything. After all, how do you make sense of the fact that a defiant prophet has fled, put the lives of a ship's crew at risk, asked for death, been obliged in his request to be thrown overboard, and then been swallowed whole into a place that ought to be a place to die, but turns out to be a place where he lives? So, did God provide the fish belly so Jonah could think about his life? Then why 3 days and 3 nights? 3 seconds in a monster fish belly would be enough to get me thinking. So Jonah starts to pray. If you'll put the text up on the screen now. Jonah starts to pray, and at first we can't tell whether he's talking to the fish or to the Lord. I called out to the... Oh, wait a minute, I've got to check the walls here, see if I'm being devoured. I called out to the Lord in my distress, Mr. Whale, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried... Who am I talking to? And you heard my voice. Now, so I want the math majors and the backpackers in the crowd to pay special attention to what we hear, starting with verse 2 all the way through verse 7. If we all had one of those clickers, you know, like you use at sporting events to count the people coming in, and we counted the number of times that Jonah says, I, me, or my, the clicker total would be 24. Now, what do we usually call a person who seems almost entirely self-focused? This is the part where I asked you a question so you can answer. What do you usually call someone who is entirely self-focused? Okay. He accuses God of casting him into deep water. You cast me into the deep. That's a little odd, since he's the one who has to be thrown overboard. He then says, I am driven away from your sight. Well, that's a little odd, since he's the one who's headed to Spain. He then says, the waters closed in over me. The deep surrounded me. That's a little odd, because he's saying this from within a fish provided by God, from whose belly he is alive, and now making this prolonged narcissistic complaint. So thank you, math people. If you continue counting through verse 7, you'll get 24. Okay, hikers, here's where I need your help. Jonah has been steadily scaling Mount Complaint, and he has been upping his invective with each successive switchback. But do you know those unusual points when you find yourself on a steep ascent where momentarily you go down just for a little and it provides you kind of a breath of fresh air. You get to, well, Jonah hits one of those downward inclines in verse 6. He says, I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yeah, Jonah, we heard you the first 5 times. And then the unexpected downward switchback, where Jonah says, yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. Whoa. He actually makes God the good guy for a moment. For a brief moment, he can see something other than himself. Where'd that come from? Well, wherever it came from, he's quickly back on the me wagon. He says, as my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord and my prayer came to you. He just can't help himself. Even if he tries to make it be about God, he finds a way to make it be about him. Then, in a final display of misdirection, the magician Jonah turns to the illogic of comparison. I'm okay because you're not. He says, those who worship vain idols forsake their true loyalty, but I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. Oh God, you don't even know how good I am. What I have vowed, I will pray. I promise to you, man, I'm going to do it. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. He says out loud as true what he's worked so hard to deny, that God is the giver of life and freedom. God wanted it for Nineveh and sent Jonah to call them to repentance. That's what you'll be getting to in the next 2 weeks. And in the initial call of God for him to go there, he said, no, I won't go there. No, you won't deliver the Ninevites, God, because I'm not going. So, isn't it amazing that the end of this weird psalm of complaint from Jonah, God does not speak to Jonah. God spoke to what? Then the Lord spoke to the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon the dry land. Other translations say vomited. Wouldn't you love to know what God said to the fish? Wouldn't you love to know what Jonah's first words were on dry land? Do you know that you're allowed to wonder about that? You're allowed. It's what people for centuries have called sanctified imagination. It's the joyful moment when we realize we feel more and more curious to know about the God we love. I really want to know what God said to the fish. Maybe it was, good job. I sent a load of krill for you. It's just a mile offshore. Bon appetit. Could have happened. Now, what I've just done, friends, is to share with you what strikes me about chapter 2. If I read it again a year from now, I know I'll see other things. I might even see it completely differently. That's because it's such an amazing story. It has so much room in it. So you've seen that through my eyes right now, I see Jonah as a clueless, defiant, and boastful guy. But there have been faithful people through the centuries who have seen the Jonah of chapter 2 as sincere and repentant. After all, in chapter 3, when God tells Jonah once again to go to Nineveh, he goes. Now, the story has another turn after he goes, but he goes. So, did his 3 days in the belly change him? Maybe the story is about how quickly people change. How quickly they can turn from tagging along with God to running away from God. Or friends, what if the main character of the story of Jonah isn't Jonah? What is God doing? Is sending the fish an act of mercy? Is it a wake-up call? Why does God care about such a defiant man? Why does God care about defiant people like you and me? Thank you for doing the religious life with me today. Amen.